This is part 3 of what I think is going to be a 4-part series on the nature, design, and general rules of the United Societies. Very interesting title, I know. Look, if you haven't watched the previous 2, you probably should. This is reviewing a document that was foundational for the Methodist revival movement, kind of just laying out what the spiritual heritage, the DNA of the group was. Starts off with the story about how the United Societies came to be. It was a voluntary group, a revival movement within Great Britain originally, and then eventually in the United States and across the world. But they governed themselves in a certain way. They were highly disciplined. They were very spirit-oriented. They had a certain way of life that was spelled out in the 3 general rules: do no harm, do good, attend upon the ordinances of God. Sometimes you're going to hear people say that the third one is stay in love with God. That's a loosey-goosey, dishonest representation of what's in here, as we're going to see today. The first video that we did in this series was just looking at the beginning and the end portions, where it kind of lines out the general first principles for how they did things. The second episode was on Rule 1. We did that last week, and that's the rule of do no harm. Now, all of Rule 1 is very specific. It has very specific things that Christians should not be doing. And if you watch that, it has scriptural citations for each one. Today, we're going to be doing rules 2 and 3. Remember, 2 was do good, 3 was attend upon the ordinances of God. The ordinances are very specific, but the doing good you're going to find is much more general, and you'll see why here in a bit, even though it does have some specifics. So anyway, we're gonna go directly into it. I'll read through each. I might talk a little bit through. This should be about 10 minutes long, 10 to 12 we've been shooting for. So let's start with rule number 2. It just goes on, it begins, secondly, by doing good, by being in every kind merciful after their power, as they have opportunity, by doing good of every possible sort, and as far as possible to all men. So it's starting off very general, big. We need to be merciful. That means we could do harm, we could hurt people, but we choose not to. And then to do good. And if you don't know it, good and God, the words are closely related, because God sets the standard for what is good. So another way of saying you should be good is you should be godly. So continuing on, it says we should do good of every possible sort, as far as possible to all men. To their bodies is next. Of the ability which God giveth, by giving food to the hungry, by clothing the naked, by visiting or helping them that are sick or in prison. These are all specific works of mercy that are detailed by Jesus in Matthew chapter 25 with the sheep and the goats. So it's reinforcing those specific actions. We need to do those good things. Secondly, to their souls. So we had to their bodies, now to their souls, by instructing, reproving, that means correcting, or exhorting, that means encouraging, all we have any intercourse with. So yeah, the role of the Christian is in any touch points with any people that we know, we should be teaching them, correcting them, encouraging them in their souls. So this is in a religious sense. Well, what if people don't want to do that? It goes on, trampling underfoot that enthusiastic doctrine that we are not to do good unless our hearts be free to do it. In this context, enthusiastic does not mean, it's a pejorative. Enthusiastic Christians are those ruled by their guts rather than their principles or their love for God. He's saying there are a lot of people who just don't want to, and they're going to come up with this doctrine that they actually don't have to do these good things unless God makes them want to do it. So if they don't want to, then they don't have to. And this is saying that's ridiculous. If you are a believer, you do what you're expected to do, whether or not you want to. And then the next portion is just a short passage saying, by all possible diligence and frugality, that the gospel not be blamed. So it's just saying in everything that we do, frugality and diligence need to mark everything that we do. Diligence is working hard and smart at the same time. And then frugality is not wasting things. So in everything that we do, we shouldn't waste. We should work hard. We should work smart. Next one, by running with patience the race which is set before them, denying themselves and taking up their cross daily, submitting to bear the reproach of Christ, to be as the filth and offscouring of the world, and looking that men should say all manner of evil against them falsely for the Lord's sake. So this is snippets of lots of different scriptures directly tied to Jesus. Jesus himself setting the standard for running the races from Paul, but the rest, denying yourself, taking up your cross daily, submitting to bear the reproach of Christ, being as filth in the offscouring of the world. People are going to say things false and evil about you because of Christ. These are all things that Jesus himself warned of. So these should be daily markers of how we live in the world, not with pride or haughtiness, but with lowliness and humility. Next, it is expected. Okay, so that's the end of the second rule. So the transition point is, it is expected of all who desire to continue in these societies that they should continue to evidence their desire of salvation. So they're attending upon rule 1 first, do no harm. Then the second rule, do good. And then as they continue to do those things, they're expected to do this third rule. Thirdly, by attending upon all the ordinances of God. So God ordains that his people should live in such a way, in a certain way that we're going to talk about. There are certain things that he has ordained that we should do. And it's not like some kind of mix and match thing where we get to pick some and not do others. Rather, we're supposed to do all of what God has ordained. So 1, the public worship of God. It's the clear scriptural expectation that people gather together in the name of Christ to worship publicly, not privately. You know, maybe in a sense of persecution, a place of persecution, people can privately gather. But the expectation is that we publicly gather with other people as a sign and proclamation, not just of the good news, but of the impending kingdom. Next, the ministry of the word, either read or expounded. So this is not exclusive. This can be done at public worship, but the notion is that you need to be regularly in a setting where people are reading aloud the Bible and then talking about what it means. That is a clear scriptural ordinance. The next one is the supper of the Lord. Jesus said directly, do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me. Whenever he instituted the Last Supper, often called the Great Thanksgiving, not the Last Supper, the Lord's Supper, he said that this is something that all of us should do. Family and private prayer. Another very basic, very key thing that the scriptures obviously require. Now, they talk much more about private prayer, but if you've ever had a family, you know that you need to be in prayer with family. Martin Luther, the great reformer, was great in pointing out that the number one church that people are enrolled in is the household, and the family should be a crucible for training Christians in faith, especially our young. So parents should be praying with your children, always. Children should be praying with your parents. Next is searching the scriptures. So that's not public proclamation. That's not what we're doing in public worship. That's what we're privately doing as we get to know the scriptures. We are searching them for meaning and letting them guide us in our lives. And then finally, fasting or abstinence. Fasting, of course, is denying ourselves by not eating for a period of time or drinking anything with nutrition, letting our bodies tell us, hey, I'm hungry, I need some nutrition, and then intentionally saying, nope, Jesus is all that I need. I'm denying my body for Jesus. And whether you fast for just 20 hours or 20 days, fasting is important. Jesus fasted, early apostles and disciples fasted, all Christians fasted until very recently in human history. And then abstinence is another form of self-denial where we're denying ourselves our sexual urges in particular. And usually it's not good to do that in marriage unless it's for a set-aside time and then you come back together. But generally abstinence is not generally, always expected for anyone unmarried. It is a lifestyle of abstinence until you're married. And even when you're married, sometimes if sex is taking too big a role in your life, it is good to set it aside and say, nope, Jesus is the main thing in my life. So as a general reminder, as people engaged in these general rules, these were things that were taken very seriously. They determined people's membership in the Methodist societies. People were often kicked out whenever they straight up did not obey these rules and were not interested in it. Today, there's really nothing of a sort that can be found within acceptable Christian denominations. Pretty much everybody who lives in this way is considered a cult, considered socially unacceptable. But it's worth asking, is there something lost whenever people get to engage in institutions on their own terms and are not held accountable to any standards. So most people would say, no, we hold people to some standard. Well, what about standards this specific? What happens whenever you have voluntary groups of people saying, I want to be subject to the scriptures. I want you guys to hold me accountable to what our Lord has said in his holy word. And I want you guys to encourage me, and I want you to warn me, and I want you to, even if it comes out, kick me out if I'm not playing by the rules that we have set. So these are the general rules. And I think we're going to do one more next week on the class meeting, because that was the instrument whereby they got conformity to these rules. But I think it's just important as we're making our way through these to remember Methodism is at a critical junction point historically right now, where we're trying to decide, does the world still have need for us? And a lot of people are willing to say yes, but they're not really excited to talk about our roots, our foundations, how it is that we became known as people that were methodical, and how it is that we could bring that to the world today for God's glory and for the good of the world. So continue meditating on this with me. Like I said, next week we'll talk about the class meeting, and hopefully God will be glorified in all this. And I'm praying that Methodism experiences another revival. I think would be good for the world. So pray for that with me.